What is fourth wave feminism? Fourth wave feminism is a much ignored topic. Many people believe that fourth wave feminism does not exist, or they try to say that categorizing feminism into waves is not productive. Most current self-identified feminists seem to avoid any such title, but instead call themselves intersectional feminists. Many feminist critics, anti-feminists, and men's rights advocates often tend to attack what they view as third-wave feminism. So what is the difference? And why is the difference important? The briefest description is that third-wave feminism happened when gender studies was in its infancy in universities in the early 90s. The Olympia, Washington riot girl punk scene was thriving, and small photocopied publications called zines were one of the primary forms of non-mainstream communication. Third-wave feminists strongly rejected mainstream media. Fourth wave, however, is mainly powered by the internet, though still remains strongly tied to academia and universities. Fourth wave feminists are largely led by feminists who studied the third wave, and maybe teach at colleges, or write for blogs. However, many fourth wave feminists don't even attend university or college, as many of them are not even adults, so their information is often entirely gathered from the internet. Many young fourth wave feminists are on Tumblr. Popular fourth wave blogs include Everyday Feminism, Jezebel, Feministing, Bustle, and The Mary Sue, but it should be of note that the vast majority of media strongly favors fourth wave feminists. Publications like The Guardian UK, GQ, and any mainstream women's magazine will largely employ fourth wave feminists as contributors. Often, once these feminists gather their information from the internet, they take it with them into the classroom and a cross-pollination occurs. Maybe even the most important distinction that fourth wave feminism has brought to the table is what the Wikipedia entry on it describes as call-out culture, which is the cultural suggestion that feminists should be angered by, and then criticize, or as they say, call out, what they see as oppressive words and behaviors. This happens particularly often on the internet, of course, and has been responsible for many notable events over the past few years. Fourth wave feminism has been the cultural ethos that led to feminists forming internet mobs on places like Twitter to attack people's careers. Many followers of this ideology feel that when there is no legal precedent to indict a person on any crime, it should be socially acceptable to draw attention to them on social media in a negative manner. Many people call this some form of mob justice, bullying, and some opponents have even called it a form of harassment, as is evident in the case of Stephanie Guthrie versus Gregory Allen Elliott. These online campaigns can also turn into legal battles. In this case, the fourth wave feminist Stephanie Guthrie had a differing opinion with Gregory Elliott about a type of mob justice she was using to pursue and demonize a third party with. Gregory Allen Elliott believed her behavior to be harmful and bullying, and got into a Twitter argument about it. Eventually Guthrie called the police, had Elliott arrested, and brought Elliott up on criminal harassment charges. He was banned from the internet for 3 years while the trial took place, and in the end was found not guilty by the judge. In examining the tweets in question, the judge not only saw no indication that Guthrie might have feared for her safety like she had claimed, but also nothing worse coming from Elliott than what had come from Guthrie. Furthermore, Elliott was a graphic designer prior to the incident, so his career was drastically harmed by the fact that he was not allowed to use the internet for the 3 years in which the trial took place. You see, call-out culture has had some very real consequences. But how does third wave and fourth wave tie together? A longer history of feminism in the past 50 years begins with the second wave during the civil rights era in the United States. There were legitimate legal barriers that women faced in many instances. However, these were mostly done away with by the movement, and legal equality was largely provided to women by the 1980s. Many people would argue that rights for women have been obtained entirely, or even that women now have more rights than men, but it varies from state to state, and that is besides my point. Still, gender-specific issues towards women did not vanish. Reproductive rights has consistently been an issue in many states, as are the rights of single mothers in many instances. Furthermore, women still suffered from problems men rarely suffer from, like rape, serious injury from domestic abuse, higher rates of poverty, sexist language and other derogatory terms, discrimination in the workplace, especially sexual harassment, and several other concerns. Third-wave feminism was born as a way to attempt to counter these problems that women face. Although most legal discrimination against women had stopped by the end of the second wave, second wavers did not pass the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution, which would constitutionally protect discrimination based on sex. However, it should be of note that this was not considered a universal failure of feminism. Many second-wave feminists decided that they did not actually want such a constitutional amendment in place, including leaders like Gloria Steinem. Many people speculate it is because most feminists did still want some gender-specific treatment, like the ability to avoid being drafted for war. But it would be intellectually dishonest to cite any monolithic reason some feminists turned against the Equal Rights Amendment, and why it failed. Third-wave feminists are largely said to be women who believe that the Equal Rights Amendment should have passed. These women were the pioneers of gender studies departments, which began their formation in the late 80s. They were largely people who had been involved in the second wave movement, but felt that they needed to pick up where the second wave left off in all of the various discontents that women have in Western society. To battle against these grievances, many authors developed strategies in the form of theories. For example, Laura Mulvey wrote about the male gaze, which is the idea that media representation is designed to appeal to a heterosexual male audience while placing deliberate emphasis on sexualizing the women portrayed. Also important is that intersectionality theory was coined first in 1989, which is the study of looking at oppressions as overlapping and building upon each other instead of being singular entities. While intersectionality was not a major emphasis during the third wave's peak in the 90s, it never completely went away. Third wave feminism itself never completely ended, which is probably why most critics of current feminism still criticize third-wave feminism as their talking point. However, it mostly vanished out of popularity during the Bush years, when the primary focus of civil rights began to shift towards the marriage equality debate and other activists invested their energy in fighting against the war in Iraq and later in Afghanistan. Being a self-proclaimed feminist became somewhat uncool. But the gender studies departments never disappeared, of course, and many third-wave feminists carried on through the Bush era. Wikipedia claims that the fourth wave of feminism started in 2008. We should also note that this was the first year that Hillary Clinton ran for office. Another distinction between fourth-wave feminists and third-wave feminists which is important to make is that fourth-wave feminists tend to be much more adamant about the truth behind what third-wave feminists admit is mere theory. Patriarchy theory, for example, is very debatable and often makes great claims about how society operates which cannot be proven. Yet clearly fourth-wave feminists speak of it as if it is an absolute. Rape culture is another such debatable theory. Intersectionality is yet another, which is particularly potent in action because it can be twisted around to suit various agendas at any given time. While the basis of intersectionality is simply the idea that an individual who faces various forms of disadvantage due to their identity has their own unique version of hardship, many people twist around the concept to try to claim that their life, or another person's life, must be inherently more difficult than any given person. Many fourth-wave intersectional feminists seem to believe they can accurately calculate how difficult somebody's life is based on looking at their profile photo on Facebook or Twitter, looking at their gender identity, and asking what their sexual preference is. If somebody who really studied intersectionality theory in detail, especially during the third wave, were to examine individuals on the internet, they would likely know that things are much more complicated than that. But remember, the vast majority of fourth-wave intersectional feminists get their information from the internet as a primary source. Therefore, if a fourth-wave feminist is viewing the people they talk to as simple avatars on the internet in which they can observe and calculate the hardships of, they will almost always get a very skewed perception of that individual's life experiences. They often think that their perception of an individual is a tangible entity, when most people are aware that a person's life experiences are anything but. Like I have already mentioned, Fourth-wave feminists also tend to think very much in absolutes in many different respects. For example, they almost universally say that men cannot experience sexism, when in reality, the vast majority of third-wave feminists usually admitted that both genders can suffer from discrimination based on their gender. Fourth-wavers also tend to unanimously declare any form of criticism or even questioning of a victim to be victim-blaming, even when it is done in good faith for productive reasons, and the victim doesn't even feel blamed themselves. Third-wavers, on the other hand, put a particular emphasis on helping women avoid being victimized, which has largely seemed forgotten by the fourth wave. Fourth-wave feminists are almost universally entrenched in more general social justice ideology, by way of intersectionality theory, which not only allows them, but demands them to care about the rights of different historically marginalized groups. These groups include, and are mostly limited to, Black people, with a particular emphasis on Black women, lesbians, trans people, genderqueer people, disabled people, overweight people, Native American people, Latino people, and Muslim people. Asian people are still considered oppressed despite earning more money in the USA than white people, because they are people of color, and also because of the stereotypes Western men have historically placed on Asian women as subservient, and the negative stereotypes about Asian men being considered sexually undesirable. Some fourth-wave feminists consider Jewish people and gay men to be an oppressed group, but more and more seem to be claiming that these are no longer oppressed minorities. Fourth-wave feminists often now say that Jewish people are an oppressor class, based on the state of Israel occupying Palestine, and they commonly even go so far as to claim that gay men are even more misogynistic than straight men. Some of you might be asking yourselves, am I a fourth-wave feminist? It should be of note that fourth-wave feminists put a particular emphasis on rigidly defining what gets to be classified as feminist or not. It is not uncommon for fourth-wave feminists to turn on each other and attempt to claim that a member of their ideology has done something transgressive against the entire cause, and should therefore be excommunicated. Commonly these fourth-wavers will call for boycotts on blogs these people are associated with, Twitter hate mobs against other feminists, and even occasionally real-life protests. It is not uncommon for fourth-wave feminists to accuse each other of being rape apologists, of being white feminists who are not intersectional enough, and of supporting the patriarchy in some way or another. Fourth-wave feminists also take particular pride in not only ignoring oppositional viewpoints, but actively silencing them, as I already illustrated with the case of Gregory Allen Elliott. Twitter hate mobs from fourth-wave feminists can even turn into legal battles. However, this usually happens on a much smaller scale. On the internet, disagreeing with a fourth-wave feminist can easily get you blocked from their social media. It is almost impossible to post any potentially controversial topics on the feminism group in Reddit, for example, without the moderator banning you from the group. Feminist critics such as Christina Hoff Sommers and Janice Fiamengo are protested on college campuses, sometimes violently. Almost any disagreement with fourth-wave feminists about the way men and boys are treated in society will incite them to label an individual as a men's rights advocate, even if they do not identify that way and know nothing about the men's rights movement, even if they are women. Furthermore, fourth-wave feminists believe that the men's rights movement is a hate group because of the classification by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So this is a way to mark somebody as a hateful misogynist bigot for the fourth-wave feminists. However, if you ask them why exactly the men's rights movement was classified that way, the vast majority of them will not be able to tell you. It is of the opinion of Common Sense Gender Network that fourth-wave feminists are particularly cult-like in their mentality, as they seem completely unwilling to ever compromise or even question their belief system, and actively attack anybody that ever threatens it. From our perception, third-wave feminism might have had many holes in its theories, but it was not a destructive movement by itself. Sure, there were always radicals within third-wave feminism who reflected these ethos, but they were just that, radicals. Various accounts of history have shown that they existed within the second wave too. Regardless, fourth-wave feminism has normalized much of the radicalism, and now seems to actively seek to garner social power. More importantly, it seems to want to control media, and even gather control within governments and institutions. In some instances, like Anita Sarkeesian, it seems to have made her relatively wealthy. Many people would argue that the most pragmatic difference between third-wave feminism and fourth-wave feminism is that fourth-wave feminism has grabbed for power, when third-wave feminism was content to exist as a dormant philosophy, at least during their heyday. Therefore, when criticizing feminism as a whole, if that is what you choose to do, it should be said that while criticizing third-wave feminism is not an entirely foolish endeavor, as there are numerous flaws in the theories it coined, what feminist critics should really be focusing on is criticizing fourth-wave feminism. It is of the opinion of Common Sense Gender Network that the vast majority of people in the entire world would be highly critical of fourth-wave feminism and its followers if they had any clear understanding of what it truly is. This includes people who consider themselves feminists, but grew up during the second or third wave. Most people who self-identify as feminists are probably actually not fourth-wave feminists, and are not very vocal about their feminist beliefs. However, they might still listen to fourth-wave feminists in the media and not realize how much nonsense is involved in fourth-wave feminism. I hope this video helps you explain the difference. Thanks for watching.